Edward Jenner was born in Berkeley, England in 1749. At the age of 14, he became an apprentice for a local surgeon and then at age 21 trained in London at St. George Hospital to become a doctor. Jenner then returned to Berkeley and opened his own medical practice as a general practitioner. He would become a major contributor to microbiology and even be called the father of immunology, by being the first to study and report on the effects of the use of cowpox vaccination to prevent smallpox. Smallpox, also known as the variola virus, was an infectious disease. In the 18th century, smallpox was considered to be the most deadly and persistent human pathogenic disease. The first symptoms were a high fever, headaches, body aches, and vomiting. Then skin sores would develop and spread across the body within 24 hours, starting in the mouth and throat and spreading to the face, arms, legs, and then the rest of the body. The sores would fill with fluid and then scab over. Smallpox was highly contagious, disfiguring, and deadly. The virus crippled the immune system. In most people with the disease, sudden death occurred 6 days after developing a fever, and 3 out of 10 people who got the disease died. Smallpox does not have a cure but can be prevented by vaccines. Smallpox was declared eradicated in 1980 thanks to the work of Edward Jenner and his vaccinations. Edward Jenner produced a smallpox vaccine in 1758, which was the world's first vaccine. Prior to Jenner's vaccine, the method used to prevent smallpox was called variolation. This exposed people to infected pustules, infecting the healthy person with a weakened strain of smallpox, allowing their body to fight it off and build immunity. Although this method worked, it was not preventing the disease from spreading and could still cause the person to contract the full disease and die. Edward Jenner had heard a circulating rumor and noticed himself that milkmaids were seemingly immune to smallpox and inferred that it was somehow linked to the cows. Through research, Jenner developed the theory that previous exposure to cowpox caused immunity to smallpox. Jenner experimented by placing pus from a smallpox-infected milkmaid into a cut of a little boy and then exposing that boy to the smallpox disease. Jenner found that the boy was immune to the disease and coined the term for this process, vaccination. The root word vacca meaning a cow in Italian. This worked because cowpox is in the same virus family as smallpox. This worked because cowpox is in the same virus family as smallpox, but is a comparatively harmless disease. Cowpox caused sores to develop on milkmaids' hands and a slight fever, but was nowhere near as harmful or deadly as smallpox. The previous exposure to the virus allowed the immune system to build immunity and fight off smallpox. Jenner continued to inoculate and monitor several children with the cowpox virus, even his own 11-month-old son. But it wasn't until many years later that smallpox was able to be completely eradicated due to skepticism of the vaccine. When Jenner published his works, he was ridiculed and met with many critics. People made cartoons of children growing cows' heads due to the vaccination. People thought it was ungodly to inject someone with material from a deceased animal. However, the advantages of the vaccine eventually could not be denied, and vaccination soon became widespread. The vaccine saved countless lives. Jenner continued research in many other areas of medicine until his death in 1823. Jenner's work was an enormous medical breakthrough. It continued to affect people long after his death and continues today. Everyone knows the impact vaccines have on our society. Vaccination greatly reduces disease, disability, and death worldwide. Even still, the great vaccine debate continues today. Very harmful diseases such as diphtheria, measles, and polio are now preventable due to vaccinations. Many of these diseases would still be very common today if it were not for Edward Jenner's contributions to microbiology and his progress in vaccinations and disease control. Edward Jenner is known for saying, "I hope that someday the practice of producing cowpox in human beings will spread over the world. When that day comes, there will be no more smallpox." This was said about 100 years before smallpox was actually eradicated from society, and it's amazing to know that his contributions led to this happening.
In America in the 1950s, summertime was a time of fear and anxiety for many parents. This was the season when children by the thousands became infected with the crippling infectious disease called poliomyelitis or polio. The virus spreads from person to person and can invade an infected person's brain and spinal cord, causing paralysis. But thanks to Dr. Jonas Salk, polio has been nearly eradicated in society today. Jonas Edward Salk was born October 28, 1914, in New York City, a son of Russian Jewish immigrants. The first member of his family to attend college, he earned his medical degree from New York University School of Medicine in 1939. While attending medical school at New York University, Salk was invited to spend a year researching influenza. The virus that causes flu had only recently been discovered, and Salk was eager to learn if the virus could be deprived of its ability to infect, while still giving immunity to its illness. Salk succeeded in this attempt, which became the basis of his later work on polio. In 1947, Salk was appointed director of the Virus Research Laboratory at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. With funding from the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, now known as the March of Dimes Birth Defects Foundation, he began to develop the techniques that would lead to a vaccine to wipe out the most frightening disease of the time, paralytic poliomyelitis. Contrary to the era's prevailing scientific opinion, Salk believed his vaccine, composed of a killed or inactivated version of the polio virus, could immunize without the risk of infecting the patient. Salk administered the vaccine to volunteers who had not had polio, including himself, his lab scientist, his wife, and their children. All developed anti-polio antibodies and experienced no negative reaction to the vaccine. In 1954, national testing began on 1 million children ages 6 to 9, who became known as the polio pioneers. On April 12, 1955, the results were announced. The vaccine was safe and effective. In the 2 years before the vaccine was widely available, the average number of polio cases in the U.S. was more than 45,000. By 1962, that number had dropped to 910. Hailed as a miracle worker, Salk never patented the vaccine or earned any money from his discovery, preferring it to be distributed as widely as possible. Since the vaccine became accepted across the country, America has been polio-free since 1979, according to the CDC. Although later an oral version of the vaccine using a live virus was developed, Salk's injectable inactivated version proved to be more reliable and is still used in America today, providing 99% immunity to children who are vaccinated. Salk's vaccination remains the greatest defense against polio in society today. During Salk's life, he also founded the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in La Jolla, California in 1963, which paved the way for much of today's scientific research and discoveries. Currently, the major study areas at Salk Institute are aging and regenerative medicine, cancer biology, immune system biology, metabolism and diabetes, neuroscience, and neurological disorders, and plant biology. Salk research provides new understanding and potential treatments for a range of diseases, from AIDS and Alzheimer's to cancer and cardiovascular disorders. Discoveries by plant biologists are paving the way to improving the quality and quantity of the world's food supply and to addressing critical environmental problems, including global warming. Salk spent his last years searching for a vaccine against AIDS. He died on June 23, 1995, at the age of 80 in La Jolla, California. His life's philosophy is memorialized at the Institute with his now famous quote, "Hope lies in dreams, in imagination, and in the courage of those who dare to make dreams into reality."
Maurice Hillman is one of the most influential and renowned names in science regarding vaccine development. He was born on August 30th, 1919 in Miles City, Montana. His love of science started at a young age. He grew up in the Great Depression, and so in that kind of economic climate, he really wanted to pursue something that could offer him economic gain, but also benefit the people around him. So he went to Montana State University and gained bachelor's degrees in both microbiology and chemistry, a double major. Then he continued on and went to Chicago for his graduate degree, and he got those PhDs in both chemistry and microbiology as well. He was a huge proponent of taking information learned in the laboratories and actually putting it into action instead of just keeping research going and et cetera, et cetera. Even though he was a big proponent of research, he wanted to actually use that research in everyday life. And so that's what made him a great candidate to actually create vaccines for public health protection and promotion. He has a few events that kind of defined his life of research and academics, and one of which is the severe influenza outbreak in Hong Kong. He did a bunch of research and basically assumed that it was due to a new strain of influenza. He worked to get a bunch of different facilities on board for actually producing a vaccine that would hopefully eradicate that strain of influenza. And after about 2 years, after his diligent work, the numbers drastically decreased, and millions of families were obviously thankful for his passion for the solution and for actually getting there in the end and actually making a difference rather than just research in a laboratory. And so he was able to make that vaccine, and that has kind of fueled the rest of the influenza vaccines that people still get on a yearly basis today. He was also responsible for developing over 40 other different vaccines, even though that is his most commonly known one. But this includes the measles vaccine, mumps, hepatitis A and hepatitis B, meningitis, and pneumonia. And that's really just to name a few. As I said, over 40 different vaccines, so that's a lot. He's been awarded many different awards for his advancements in these fields of study. I just say Meadle, okay, it's fine. This includes the National Medal of Science for Biological Sciences, Laker Bloomberg Public Service Award, and Prince Mayadol Award. Hillman died of cancer on April 11th, 2005. Hillman's good lifelong friend Fosse once said about Hillman that he didn't really care about the fame at all. The only thing Hillman cared about was saving the lives of innocent children, and he was amazing. You had to know the guy to know that's the way he really felt about the situation. Knowing that that's the way that Hillman's closest confidants talked about him and talked about his passion in life really gives you insight into that his heart was truly in it for the right reasons and not just for the money or for the fame or for the title or various awards that he received. Anthony Fosse also said, very few people, even in the scientific community, and are even remotely aware of the scope of Maurice had contributed. I recently asked my postdocs whether they knew who developed the measles, mumps, rubella, hepatitis B, and chickenpox vaccines. They had no idea. And though a sad moment in history, I think it can be marked by Hillman's profoundly influential life and his work to save millions of people, quite literally, through his work on vaccines of all sorts in other areas of science.
The three scientists we would discuss, Edward Jenner, Jonas Salk, and Maurice Hillman, developed and pioneered vaccinations that saved many lives and are still used today. Edward Jenner, also known as the father of immunology, introduced a vaccine for smallpox. Jonas Salk developed the first safe and effective vaccination for polio. Lastly, Maurice Hillman, although largely unknown, developed more than 20 vaccines and is one of the most successful vaccinologists in history. Because of these scientists, we have vaccinations for diseases that are still used today. Although these men developed these vaccines for different diseases, their work somewhat fits together. All of these scientists developed vaccinations for certain diseases. They researched the disease, and instead of stopping with the research, they developed ways to prevent these diseases from harming individuals. Their work also fits in together because they created these vaccinations with a strand of the disease itself. For example, Jonas Salk developed his polio vaccine, which is an inactive form of the virus. This would cause a person to make antibodies without becoming infected. Maurice Hillman created a vaccination for the mumps by extracting a sample from his daughter's throat, who was infected with the viral infection, and used that sample to make the vaccine. And lastly, Edward Jenner created a vaccination for smallpox by taking a sample of pus from the infected area. As you can see, vaccinations are our greatest defense against diseases, despite the controversy today that they cause more harm than good. They have helped to stop the spread of preventable diseases throughout the history and would not be here today if not for the contributions of these men to microbiology.
And now for your favorite part of the show, Fun Facts with Riley.
Edward Jenner's hobby was to collect fossils. He was fascinated by wildlife and birds and wrote a book called Observations on the Migration of Birds. In 1821, he was appointed physician extraordinary to King George IV.
And in case you're wondering, Maurice Hillman actually kept a row of figurines that were different people's heads that one of his kids actually made for him, and they were all his fired employees. So, yeah, cool dude.
Some fun facts about Jonas Salk. His father was a clothing designer. He planned to be a lawyer and serve in Congress. He was rejected from multiple labs after medical school, and he tested the polio vaccine on his own family.
Salk never patented, how do you say that word?
I can't even. Think happy. Think Disney Channel 2008. Yeah.
Oof.